AITA for cutting my brother out of my life after he slept with my unconscious girlfriend. Hi Reddit, I'm looking for advice on moving on as this happened around 5 or 6 years ago and a lot has happened since the initial incident. Ages are from the time of the incident. Some things I'm fuzzy on, just from the passage of time, but I tried to go through all the old messages I still had available to me. I, 23M, had recently graduated college and started a new job that required me to occasionally travel out of state. My girlfriend Jane, 23F, and I had recently moved out from living with my dad and younger brother John, 18M. Prior to moving out, Jane and John were close. She considered him a second brother and went out of her way to make him feel part of our family. I received word from work that I'd need to leave for 2 weeks during our busiest time of the year to be on site and didn't want to leave my girlfriend alone in our new place, so I asked my mom Ellen to keep in touch with Jane, in case anything happened. While I was gone, Ellen invited Jane out for drinks with some friends and family and Jane got far too drunk to drive home. This was a common issue at the time anytime she went drinking, so she stayed in Ellen's guest room. I received a text from Jane the following morning with a cryptic message about something happening and she couldn't really remember. I called her and we talked about it for a few hours, but she couldn't really remember anything more. She just felt like something was off and had vague memories of John from the previous night. After some long discussions with Jane and some agreements on her behalf to not drink when I'm gone and to be more careful, we decided to move on. I was positive if it was serious that John would reach out on his own, or that I'd hear something from Ellen. Fast forward 2 years, and I asked Jane to marry me. We'd been seeing each other for 6 or 7 years at the time and it felt long overdue. We planned the date for a bit less than a year out and planned to keep it on the smaller side. We talked for a while about plans and sent out invitations. John was planned to be one of the groomsmen, as we'd been a bit estranged since we moved out and since whatever happened during the incident, and it felt like a nice gesture to bury the hatchet. Over the next 2 or so months, apparently some discussions happened in the background that I wasn't privy to and I got a call from my mom, Ellen. She wanted to speak with me alone and I set up a time to meet up with her. She said that she'd spoken to a few people and felt like I needed to know something. She essentially brought up the incident and asked me if I knew about it, although she didn't really go into detail. I told her we'd had an extensive discussion about it the morning after it happened, but she wasn't ever able to give me any details. Ellen then told me that from the people she'd spoken to, John and Jane had sex in her guest room that night. She had pretty intimate details on the subject and made it clear that more than what I was originally made aware of had occurred. Additionally, Ellen told me that she had personally seen Jane and John in the car sharing alcohol and being intimate, holding hands or cuddling or something. I reached out to Jane and we had a long discussion. She made it clear that she told me everything she could remember. I was in a bad headspace and was having a really hard time figuring out who I could even trust. After a lot of calls, I ended up meeting with Ellen, my stepdad, and John where we discussed what happened. It was a long conversation where I got a lot more details than I was expecting to hear from John directly. Essentially, he told me that he'd had some alcohol that night with Jane and felt like she was leading him on. So, later that night, he snuck into her room where she was sleeping and woke her up to sleep with her. He kept it polite, but it was clear that he had a decent memory of what had occurred that night. After mulling it over, I told them with the information I had available to me and him actively hiding the information for over a year, I was under the impression he had roped Jane while she was unconscious in her bed. Ellen said that she thought Jane wasn't telling me the whole truth and she had a third party who corroborated John's story and they would talk to me if I wanted to hear from them. I told her that was fine and I'd listen, so she asked Leah to reach out to me. Leah was a family friend for a while and had been mildly acquainted with Jane. Leah reached out and sent a long message about a few anecdotes from talking with Jane over the prior year or two. I spoke with Jane regarding the message and Jane clarified the context around a lot of the evidence Leah brought up, most of which I was already familiar with but hadn't connected the dots. It was pretty clear to me that Leah was just trying to insert herself into the situation, and most of the evidence she provided was pretty much useless. The only relevant story was at some point Leah claimed Jane said she remembered Ellen's dog being in the room when it happened, which I think was intended to prove Jane was conscious when it happened. I don't remember exactly what the explanation was, but the initial claim made absolutely no sense in context of everything else I had already been told from both Jane and John. Leah later deleted this message. After some further discussions, I made the decision to trust Jane. It seemed like the only logical choice at the time and I still stand by the choice today. She was the only one who made an effort over the last year or two to fix the problems she caused, made actual lifestyle changes to prevent it from happening again, and had put in effort to build trust back in the relationship. I lost all faith in John as he'd made no effort at any point to reach out, and took Ellen stepping in to even tell his side of the story. Additionally, Jane made an effort to tell me immediately, and let me decide how I wanted to proceed in the relationship while John made no effort. Jane still refuses to call it rope but doesn't deny she was unconscious when it happened. John refuses to show his face when we come to events, and hides when he's present and either Jane or myself are in attendance. We've not spoken since the night at Ellen's house. Although, I make no effort to hide from him and I don't go out of my way to avoid him at events. I treat him like a stranger, since that's what he is to me. My mom, Ellen, is upset because they feel like we don't make an effort to include him in the family. I feel like she coddles him, protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. I also feel like my family has socially isolated Jane and I from many family events, to the point where we've had our own separate holidays on many occasions, etc. I've gotten to the point where I feel ostracized in my own family, and maybe I deserve it. So, Ada?